Hello and welcome. I'm Masood Raja, and in this video I'll briefly talk about the destructive legacies of the colonial educational system, especially when it pertains to learning in colleges and school systems. Now, those of you who are familiar with British colonial history, especially India, probably are already familiar with the so-called famous Lord Macaulay's Minute on Education. Now, I'm not going to go into intricacies of that whole debate, but what he was arguing against was in the British Parliament that instead of investing monies into what he called the Orientalist education, which a lot of Orientalists were encouraging the government to do, the Indians should be given access to English education, right? But then he qualifies that, and the way he qualifies is, and I'm paraphrasing, is to create Indians who are Indian in blood but English in sentiment, right? But the kind of education that he articulates is the kind of education that teaches basic computational skills and language skills and clerical skills. What he encouraged wasn't the kind of education that encouraged critical thought. That you must keep in mind that. Now, if you look at the colonial educational system of that time and later, the way the Indian education, let's say, was organized, at least in the government schools, was that students were required to memorize materials for classes and then reproduce them in exams. So that's what in Urdu or Hindi we call it Ratta lagana, right? Another thing was how language classes, especially English classes, were used to teach a certain kind of human subjectivity. So if you remember, I don't know if they still teach it in schools or not, we were all taught to write an application, right? Both in Urdu as well as in English. And in English, it started as most respectfully, I beg to state, right? And the final sentence used to be yours obediently. Now, that process of writing an application or a request already inscribed within it a certain degree of servility, a certain degree of, submissive slave mentality. And you'll be surprised to know that that's the language in Urdu now, also in English, followed everywhere in Pakistan, including if you go and start writing a report to the police, you still have to submit most respectfully, right? So the implications of this kind of teaching and education was to create a human subject that is not capable of thinking critically for his or herself, but is good at taking orders and executing them. Now, if you look at how English or any other subject is being taught in most of the colleges and universities in Pakistan, if the professor is more advanced, they will use slides, right? Or they will use a PowerPoint presentation. But what is offered is, okay, you want to learn deconstruction, here are the 10 things about deconstruction. There might be a little bit of explanation, but what the students are learning is how to define a literary theory, how to define a concept, and then internalizing it and repeating it. But there isn't enough encouragement to go and say, here are 5 books by Derrida or 3 articles about it. Read it, develop your own understanding of these concepts so that no one needs to give you a lecture on each particular thing, so that you have the power to extrapolate. So because of that colonial legacy, the way the educational systems have been kept in most post colonies, but my experience is from Pakistan, one thing is still not emerging, and that is the strong and vigorous critical thought. Now, on my other channel, Post Colonial Space, I often get these comments from wonderful people who always say, can you do a lecture on how to apply this? And I have to point to them. I was like, look, I have unpacked the concept for you. You can take the concept, read some more, and then apply it to whatever you want. Because if you understand the concepts in their complexity. How do we do that? You go and read. You organize classes in which students ask questions. There is a back and forth. They are not just lectures, and that do not just encourage, take these notes and reproduce them. So this is the legacy of the colonial system, in which people were trained as good note takers, as good reproducers of knowledge that was passed down to them. But efforts were made within the educational system to make sure that people don't develop skills of critical thinking, skills of challenging the assumptions of anything that is behind the text, right, and thinking beyond that. And I think that is one of the most pernicious legacy of colonialism that still haunts pretty much most of the post-colonies, especially the public educational sectors, but also a lot of the private educational sector. And maybe it's time that you, me, and I, and everyone else involved in that educational system rethought how we deliver education. What are the student expectations? What do we expect from our students? And then encourage them to learn in a way where they don't just learn the materials and reproduce them. They learn to think critically about the materials that they are learning in a class. So that's a little bit from me today. I hope this was of some use to you. If there are any strategies that you are using or you think we all could use in our classes, put them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If there is anything else that you think I could have also included in this talk, please point it out and I'll be happy to discuss it in another video conversation with you. Also, if you have not subscribed to this new channel, please do so and support us, because we need the energy that you bring to me and to this project. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Until then, peace and love.